You mess up everything. You can't even send a text to the right number." Amid the snickers of her coworkers, everyone thought it was just another joke from a clumsy girl. No one imagined that meaningless message would match a top-secret emergency code. Minutes later, engines roared, and a convoy of black SUVs swallowed the street. When 1000 SEALs encircled the house, the world fell silent. The woman they scorned was in fact the key to national security. Emily Parker stood in the break room, her hands still shaking from the coffee she'd spilled on her blouse. The stain bloomed across the plain white cotton, a dark splotch that seemed to scream her clumsiness to the whole office. She dabbed at it with a paper towel, her cheeks burning, as the laughter from the corner grew louder. Lisa, all sharp heels and sharper tongue, leaned against the counter, her perfectly manicured nails tapping out a rhythm of disdain. Tom, with his slicked-back hair and too tight tie, was right beside her, grinning like he'd just won a prize. They'd been at it all morning, picking at Emily for dropping a stack of files, for tripping on the carpet for existing in their space. She kept her head down, folding the paper towel into a neat square, but her fingers fumbled and it fell to the floor. Lisa's laugh cut through the air like a blade. "Look at her," she said, loud enough for the whole room to hear. "Can't even clean up her own mess." Emily's jaw tightened, but she didn't look up. She bent to pick up the towel, her movements slow and deliberate, like she was trying to hold herself together with every motion. The office was one of those sleek, glass-walled places where everyone seemed to compete for who could look the most important. Emily didn't fit. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, no highlights, no styling. Her clothes were plain black slacks, a blouse she'd bought on clearance flats that didn't click when she walked. She didn't wear makeup, didn't flash a smile to win anyone over. People noticed. They always noticed. To them, she was the girl who didn't belong, the one who must have snuck in through some clerical error. She'd been there 2 years filing reports, answering phones, but they still treated her like she was temporary, like she was less. Emily didn't talk about her family, didn't mention the sprawling estate she'd grown up in, or the strict rules her parents had drilled into her about humility and restraint. She didn't need to. The way she carried herself, quiet, steady, never begging for approval, said enough. But it also made her a target. Lisa sauntered over her heels, clicking like a countdown. "You know, Emily, if you tried a little harder, maybe you wouldn't be such a disaster." Her voice was syrupy, fake nice, the kind that made you feel smaller with every word. Emily straightened, folding her arms across the stained blouse. She met Lisa's eyes for a moment, her gaze calm but unflinching. "I'm fine, Lisa," she said, her voice low, steady. The room went quiet for a second, like the air had been sucked out. Lisa blinked, thrown off, then forced a laugh. "Sure you are," she said, turning back to Tom, who was already chuckling. "She's fine, everybody. Emily's fine." The others in the break room, cubicle workers, mid-level managers, joined in their laughter, a chorus that followed Emily as she walked back to her desk. She sat down, her hands smoothing out a stack of papers, her face blank, but her fingers pressing just a little too hard. A woman named Karen, the office's self-appointed queen of gossip, leaned over her cubicle wall, her earrings jangling as she shook her head. She was the kind who always had a story about someone, her voice loud enough to carry across the floor. "Emily, honey, you gotta stop embarrassing yourself," she said, her tone dripping with pity. "That wasn't real. That blouse. It's like you're trying to look homeless." The room snickered again, a few heads turning to watch. Karen kept going, her voice growing bolder. "I mean, who even hired you? You're not cut out for this place." Emily's hands paused on her papers, her fingers curling slightly. She looked up at Karen, her eyes steady, and said, "I do my job." The words were quiet, but they cut through the noise. Karen's smile froze, her earrings still swaying as she leaned back, muttering something under her breath. Emily turned back to her work, her shoulders straight, but her hands shook just enough to notice. Tom wasn't done. He leaned over the partition, his cologne hitting her like a wave. "You know what your problem is, Emily? You don't even try to look like you belong here. That shirt, those shoes. Come on." He shook his head like he was genuinely disappointed. Emily didn't answer. She opened her laptop, her fingers moving across the keys with a quiet precision. But her phone buzzed in her pocket and she pulled it out, her eyes flicking to the screen. A text from her best friend Sarah asking how her day was going. Emily's lips pressed into a thin line. She typed fast, her thumbs moving in a blur. "If I had a SEAL team, I'd shut this company down in 5 minutes." She hit send, then froze. The number at the top of the screen wasn't Sarah's. It was a random string of digits, one she didn't recognize. Her stomach dropped. She had mistyped. Before she could process it, Lisa's voice cut through again. She'd been watching her phone in hand, scrolling through something that made her smirk. "Oh my God, Emily, did you just text the wrong person?" Classic. She laughed loud and sharp, drawing every eye in the room. Tom leaned over, peering at Emily's phone before she could tuck it away. "Who do you think you are, texting about SEALs and generals? What you think? You're in some action movie?" The room erupted again, the laughter louder this time, more biting. Emily's fingers tightened around her phone, but she didn't say a word. She slipped it into her pocket, her movements slow, controlled. She looked at Tom, her eyes steady, and said, "I didn't mean to." 2 words, quiet. But they landed like a stone in water rippling out. Tom's grin faltered just for a second before he waved her off. "Whatever, Emily. You're hopeless. Hey, if this story's hitting you, grab your phone real quick. Give this video drop a comment below. Maybe tell us where you're watching from. It means a lot to keep this channel going, to share stories like Emily's with you. Hit that subscribe button too. We're in this together. All right, let's keep going." The office settled back into its hum of keyboards and phone calls, but Emily's hands wouldn't stop shaking. She stared at her computer screen, the cursor blinking like it was mocking her too. She tried to focus to push the mistake out of her mind. It was just a text, she told herself. A stupid mistake. But then her phone buzzed again. She hesitated, her fingers hovering over her pocket. When she pulled it out, the screen lit up with a new message. Message received. Deploying forces. Her breath caught. Spam, she thought. Had to be. She deleted it, her thumb moving fast, and shoved the phone back in her pocket. But the air in the office felt heavier now, like something was coming. She glanced out the window, and her heart stopped. A low rumble filled the street outside, growing louder, closer. Black SUVs, one after another, rolled into view, their tires crunching against the asphalt. They lined up, blocking the entire block, their windows dark, their engines idling like a storm about to break. Lisa was the first to notice. She'd been scrolling on her phone, but now she was at the window, her mouth half open. "What the hell is that?" she said, her voice losing its usual edge. Tom joined her, his tie swinging as he leaned forward. "Is that military?" The office went silent, everyone crowding toward the windows. Emily stayed at her desk, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes fixed on the screen. She didn't move, didn't look up, but her fingers pressed into her palms, leaving little crescent marks. Lisa turned, her eyes narrowing. "Emily, what did you do?" Her voice was sharp now, accusing. "This is because of that text, isn't it? Only an idiot would believe that was real." Emily didn't answer. She stood slowly and walked to the window. The SUVs stretched as far as she could see, and men in tactical gear were stepping out, moving with a precision that made her stomach twist. Tom laughed, but it was nervous, high-pitched. "No way. This is a prank. Right, Emily?" As the office buzzed with confusion, a coworker named Derek, a stocky guy with a loud laugh and a habit of name-dropping his connections, pushed through the crowd to the window. He was the type who always had a story about meeting someone important, his voice booming to make sure everyone heard. "Emily, you really screwed up this time," he said, his tone half amused, half accusing. He pointed at the SUVs. "What, you think you're some kind of secret agent now? This is what happens when you play around with the stuff you don't understand." He turned to the others, his laugh echoing. She probably texted some hacker group by mistake. Emily's hands tightened on her bag, her knuckles whitening. She didn't look at Derek. Instead, she walked toward the office door, her steps slow but steady. "I made a mistake," she said, her voice barely audible over the hum of the crowd. Derek snorted, shaking his head. "Yeah, a big one. Good luck cleaning this up, kid." The office laughed again, but Emily kept walking, her shoulders squared, her bag swinging lightly at her side. The office doors burst open and a man in uniform stepped inside. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his face hard as stone. The badge on his chest glinted under the fluorescent lights. "Emily Parker," he said, his voice cutting through the room. It wasn't a question. Emily turned, her hands steady now, but her eyes wide. She nodded just once. The man gestured toward the door. "Outside. Now." The room erupted in whispers, everyone staring at Emily like she'd just committed a crime. Lisa's smirk was back bigger now. "Told you," she said loud enough for everyone to hear. Classic Emily, screwing up so bad she's getting arrested. Tom crossed his arms, leaning back against a desk. "Yeah, good luck talking your way out of this one. No one's saving you now." Emily didn't respond. She picked up her bag, her movements slow, deliberate, and followed the man out. The weight of every eye in the room pressed against her back. Outside the street was chaos. Neighbors had gathered phones out filming the scene like it was a movie. The SUVs formed a tight perimeter around Emily's small apartment building, their lights flashing silently. Men in tactical gear stood at every corner, their faces unreadable behind dark sunglasses. A woman across the street shouted, "She must be a spy," and others joined in their voices a mix of fear and excitement. Emily stood in the middle of it all, her plain blouse still stained, her bag clutched against her chest. Lisa and Tom had followed her out, standing on the office steps watching with glee. "This is what you get for clowning around," Lisa called out, her voice carrying over the noise. Tom nodded, his grin wide. "Yeah, Emily, you're done. They're gonna lock you up." Emily's hands tightened on her bag, but her face stayed calm. She looked at the crowd, at the seals, at the chaos her one text had caused, and said nothing. A man named Mr. Jenkins, Emily's landlord, pushed through the crowd, his face red with anger. He was a wiry guy, always complaining about late rent or noise, his glasses slipping down his nose as he gestured wildly. "I knew you were trouble, Emily," he shouted, pointing a finger at her. "All this time acting all quiet, and now you've got the military here. You're out of my building by tomorrow." The neighbors cheered, some clapping, their phones still up. Emily's lips parted, but no words came. She looked at Mr. Jenkins, her eyes steady, and adjusted her bag on her shoulder. "I paid my rent," she said, her voice calm but firm. The crowd's noise faltered, some people glancing at each other. Mr. Jenkins blinked, his finger still pointing, then dropped his hand, muttering something about troublemakers. Emily turned away, her flats scuffing the pavement, and faced the seals, who hadn't moved an inch. An armored SUV pulled up, its door swinging open before it even stopped. General Marcus Steele stepped out, his presence sucking the air out of the street. He was older, his hair gray at the temples, but he moved like a man who owned every inch of the ground he walked on. His uniform was crisp, his medals gleaming, and his eyes locked onto Emily like she was the only person there. "Who sent the X-13 emergency code?" he asked, his voice low but carrying like thunder. Emily's knees shook, but she stood straight, her bag still clutched tight. "I sent it by mistake," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Lisa's laugh rang out, sharp and cruel. "Hear that? She thinks seals are a joke." The crowd murmured, some laughing, some shaking their heads. Tom called out, "Yeah, Emily, you really messed up this time." Marcus didn't look at them. He stepped closer to Emily, his eyes narrowing. "Maintain the perimeter," he said to the seals, his voice flat. They moved instantly, tightening the circle around her building. Emily's neighbors were getting louder now, their phones still recording, their voices sharper. A man in a baseball cap shouted, "She's got to be hiding something." A woman next to him nodded, her arms crossed. "No way, this is just a mistake. She's dangerous." Emily's hands trembled, but she didn't look away from Marcus. He studied her, his face unreadable, then gestured to a soldier nearby. "Bring her to the street," he said. The soldier took Emily's arm, not rough, but firm, and led her to the middle of the road. The crowd pressed closer, their voices, a wall of noise. Lisa was right there, her phone up, filming every second. "This is it," she said, her voice dripping with satisfaction. "This is the day Emily gets exposed." Tom leaned in, his voice loud enough for the crowd to hear. "She's spying for someone, right? No way a girl like her knows anything important." Emily's eyes flicked to him just for a moment, and she said, "I didn't mean to." Her voice was soft, but it carried. Tom froze, his grin slipping. As the soldier led Emily forward, a young woman named Mia, a barista from the coffee shop down the street, pushed to the front of the crowd. She was all flashy jewelry and bright lipstick, the kind who thrived on drama and always had an audience. "Oh, Emily, you really thought you could play with the big leagues." She called out, her voice loud and mocking. She turned to the crowd, flipping her hair. "She comes in every morning, orders the cheapest coffee, and now she's got seals at her door. Pathetic." The crowd laughed, some clapping. Emily's fingers tightened on her bag, but she didn't look at Mia. Instead, she adjusted her stance, her flats planted firmly on the pavement. "I just wanted coffee," she said, her voice quiet but clear. Mia's laugh faltered, her eyes narrowing. The crowd's noise dipped for a second, like they weren't sure how to react. Emily kept her eyes on Marcus, her face calm, but her hands shook just enough to betray the storm inside. Marcus raised a hand and the crowd went quiet. He looked at Emily, his eyes like steel. "How do you know the X-13 code?" he asked. Emily swallowed, her throat tight. I Was just texting a friend, she said, her voice breaking for a second. She stopped, took a breath, and stood straighter. It was a mistake. The crowd laughed, the sound harsh and jagged. Lisa's voice cut through again. A mistake. You expect us to believe that? She turned to the crowd, her phone still up. She's lying. She's gotta be. Marcus didn't react. He pulled out a tablet, his fingers moving fast across the screen. Run a data check, he said to a soldier nearby. The man nodded, typing into a device. Seconds later, he looked up, his face pale. Sir, the text. It matches the X-13 code exactly. Letter for letter. The crowd went silent. Marcus's eyes flicked back to Emily. That code is known to 5 people in the Pentagon, he said. How did you get it? Emily's hands tightened on her bag, her knuckles white. She didn't answer right away. Her eyes dropped to the ground, and for a moment, she looked smaller, like the weight of the moment was crushing her. Then she lifted her head, her gaze steady. I don't know, she said, her voice clear now. Marcus's jaw tightened. He tapped the tablet again, pulling up a file. His eyes scanned it, and he paused. Was your father Daniel Parker? He asked. Emily froze, her breath catching. She nodded just once. Yes, but I never knew what he did. The crowd murmured again, but it was different now. Quieter, like they were starting to sense something shifting. Lisa's smirk faltered, her phone lowering slightly. Tom shifted on his feet, his arms uncrossing. Marcus didn't look at them. He kept his eyes on Emily like he was seeing her for the first time. A soldier approached Marcus, holding a small weathered envelope marked with a faded military seal. He handed it to the general, his movements careful, almost reverent. Marcus opened it, pulling out a single sheet of paper, its edges yellowed with age. He read it silently, his face unreadable, then looked at Emily. This was found in your father's personal effects, he said, his voice low, but carrying across the street. It's a letter addressed to you. Emily's hands froze on her bag, her eyes widening. She took a step forward, then stopped, her lips parting, but no sound coming out. The crowd leaned in, their phones still up, but their voices hushed. Marcus held the letter out, and Emily took it, her fingers trembling as she unfolded it. Her dad's handwriting stared back at her, the same slanted script she'd seen in her notebook as a kid. She didn't read it aloud, but her eyes moved fast, her breath hitching. She folded it again, tucking it into her bag, her movements slow, like she was holding something fragile. The crowd watched, silent, as she straightened, her face still, but her eyes shining. The street felt different now, the air heavier, like a storm was about to break. Emily's hands loosened on her bag, but she didn't move. She stood there, surrounded by SEALs, neighbors, co-workers, all watching her like she was a puzzle they couldn't solve. Marcus handed the tablet to a soldier and stepped closer to her. Your father was a military engineer, he said, his voice low but clear. He died under unusual circumstances. Emily's eyes flicked to a car parked across the street, an old sedan with a dented fender. It was the kind of car her dad used to drive, the one he'd take her to school in when she was a kid. She'd sit in the back, her hands folded in her lap, listening to him hum softly to the radio. She blinked, pulling her eyes back to Marcus. He never told me anything, she said, her voice steady but soft. He just said to always do what's right. Lisa wasn't done. She pushed forward, her heels clicking against the pavement. Oh, come on, she shouted, her voice sharp enough to make people flinch. She's a spy's daughter. No normal person knows that code. The crowd stirred, some nodding, some shouting agreement. Tom joined in, his voice louder now, like he was trying to take control. Yeah, SEAL should arrest her. A screw-up like Emily can't be important. The neighbors picked up the chant, their voices rising. Yeah, dangerous. Lock her up. Emily's shoulders stiffened, and her eyes glistened, tears spilling over. She didn't wipe them away. She just stood there, her hands still on her bag, her face open but unbroken. Marcus watched her, his expression unreadable. He raised a hand, and the crowd went silent again, like he'd flipped a switch. One of the neighbors, a middle-aged man named Carl, stepped forward, his face twisted with indignation. He was the kind who mowed his lawn every Sunday and complained about everyone else's. I've lived next to her for years, he shouted, his voice booming over the crowd. She's always been weird, keeping to herself, never talking. Now we know why. He pointed at Emily, his finger shaking. She's been hiding this the whole time, playing us all for fools. The crowd roared, their phones bobbing as they recorded. Emily's hands shook, but she didn't look at Carl. Instead, she reached into her bag, pulling out a small keychain, a tiny silver star her dad had given her when she was 10. She held it tightly, her thumb rubbing its edges, and said, I'm just me. The words were soft, almost lost in the noise, but they made Carl pause, his finger lowering. The crowd's shouts died down, some looking away, unsure. Marcus pulled a folder from his SUV, its edges worn marked with a red classified stamp. He opened it, his eyes scanning the pages. Daniel Parker designed the X-13 emergency code, he said, his voice carrying over the street. It was meant to protect the president in a national crisis. He paused, looking at Emily. Before he died, he left sole access rights to one person. The crowd was dead silent now, every eye on him. Emily Parker, he said. Emily staggered back a step, her bag slipping from her hands. It hit the ground, spilling pens and a small notebook onto the pavement. She didn't move to pick it up. My father prepared me for this, she asked, her voice barely audible. Marcus nodded. You're not a civilian bystander. You are the inheritor of a strategic code. The crowd froze, their phones lowering, their mouths open. Lisa's hand dropped her phone, forgotten. Tom's face went pale, his arms hanging limp. As the weight of Marcus's words settled, a woman named Sandra, a local news blogger with a knack for stirring up trouble, shouted from the crowd. Her voice was shrill, her phone raised high to capture every moment. This is a setup, she yelled, her eyes wild with excitement. She's probably been planning this for years, acting all innocent to fool us. The crowd murmured, some nodding, their phones swinging back up. Sandra kept going, her voice growing louder. You can't trust someone like her with national security. She's a nobody. Emily's hands trembled, but she bent down, picking up her notebook with care. She brushed the dirt off its cover, her fingers lingering on the worn edges. I never asked for this, she said, her voice steady but soft, like she was talking to herself. Sandra's mouth snapped shut, her phone wavering. The crowd's energy shifted some, looking at Emily with new eyes, others still skeptical. Emily stood there, the weight of Marcus's words sinking in. She looked at the spilled contents of her bag, at the notebook lying open on the ground. It was the one her dad had given her years ago, its pages filled with her own messy handwriting. She'd carried it every day, not knowing why, just feeling like it mattered. Now she understood. The crowd was silent, but the air was electric, like everyone was waiting for what came next. Lisa broke the silence, her voice shrill. She's still useless, she shouted, stepping forward. She'll ruin everything. Tom nodded, his confidence creeping back. Yeah, a girl who can't even text right is gonna save anyone. The crowd murmured, some agreeing, some hesitating. Online, the live streams were blowing up, comments flooding in. No way we trust her. She's just a nobody. Emily's hands shook, but she bent down, picking up her notebook with care. She closed it, tucking it back into her bag, her movements slow, deliberate. A young SEAL barely older than Emily broke ranks for a moment, stepping closer to her. His face was serious, but his eyes were kind, like he'd seen something in her the others hadn't. He handed her a pen that had rolled away, his voice low. Ma'am, you dropped this. Emily took it, her fingers brushing his, and nodded, her lips pressing together. She slipped the pen into her bag, her movements careful, like she was holding on to something precious. The crowd watched, their murmurs fading. Lisa's eyes narrowed, her phone still up, but her smirk gone. The young SEAL stepped back, saluting Emily before returning to his post. The gesture was small, but it rippled through the crowd, some lowering their phones, others whispering. Emily stood taller, her bag clutched against her chest, her eyes meeting Marcus's again. The air felt different now, like the world was starting to see her. Marcus stepped forward, his hand resting on Emily's shoulder. The gesture was small, but it changed everything. The crowd went quiet again, the SEALs standing straighter. From this moment, Marcus said, his voice steady. Emily Parker is our highest emergency activator. He turned to the SEALs, his eyes hard. Protect her as you would the president. The SEALs responded in unison, their voices a thunderous, yes, sir, that echoed down the street. Emily stood there, her bag clutched against her chest, her face still wet with tears. Lisa and Tom stood frozen, and their faces pale. A soldier stepped forward, gesturing for them to leave. You're done here, he said, his voice flat. Lisa opened her mouth, then closed it, her heels clicking as she backed away. Tom followed, his head down, his tie swinging loose. The street was quieter now, the crowd thinning as people processed what they'd heard. Emily stood in the center of it all, her blouse still stained, her hair still plain. But something was different. The way she held her bag, the way she lifted her chin, it wasn't the same Emily who'd walked out of the office an hour ago. Marcus nodded to her, a small gesture, then turned to his men. Secure the area, he said. The SEALs moved, their boots heavy on the pavement. Emily's neighbors were still filming, but their voices were softer now, uncertain. One woman lowered her phone, her eyes meeting Emily's. She looked away, her cheeks red. Emily didn't say anything. She turned, walking back toward her apartment, her steps steady. The seals parted for her, their heads nodding slightly as she passed. The truth doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just stands there quiet, waiting for the world to catch up. Emily knew what it was like to be unseen, to be judged, to be dismissed. But she'd held her ground, not with words, but with who she was. And now the world knew too. You've been there, haven't you? Feeling small, but knowing you're more. You weren't wrong. You weren't alone. Where are you watching from? Leave a comment below and hit follow to walk with me through heartbreak, betrayal, and finally healing.